Welcome to a weekly review of North Dakota's legislative news. Now, here's your host, Dave Thompson, with North Dakota Legislative Review.
And welcome to North Dakota Legislative Review. I'm Dave Thompson. Legislature is in its final days, and there's been some interesting things that have happened this week. For example, Governor Burgum's plan to have a Theodore Roosevelt Library built in Medora has now passed both houses, and he has signed it. Now, what is happening is going to be a $150 million project. There's $100 million in private donations perhaps coming. A $50 million commitment from the state of North Dakota would include $15 million in some general funds, $35 million in a Bank of North Dakota loan, and that creates an endowment that would go toward repair and maintenance of the organization. Secondly, there's been some discussion about what happens with the proceeds from the Legacy Fund. Lawmakers are going to probably have a study on how those Legacy Fund earnings should be used. Suggestions have included road funding and tax relief, and others have suggested reinvesting back into the Legacy Fund. As a matter of fact, our guest on the program made that suggestion. It did pass one House, got turned into a study, eventually was turned back, and then the Senate killed it. Now there's possibly going to be a study coming out of that. Now, one bill that might really hang up toward the end of the session, might be one of the last bills voted upon, is a bill that would transfer grain licensing from the Public Service Commission to the Agriculture Department. Now, this was prompted by an insolvency that happened in the Devils Lake area. So there's a lot of wrangling and a lot of, shall we say, argument among legislators about what should be the first way to go. So this is one bill to watch, and of course the other bill we're going to see at the end of the session is going to be the OMB bill, which is always traditionally the last bill. So, as a matter of fact, here is our guest. He is State Representative Corey Mock from Grand Forks. He's a Democrat, and as we mentioned, he was the one who authored the potential constitutional amendment that would say Legacy Fund earnings should be reinvested back in the Legacy Fund. Why?
Well, Dave, the Legacy Fund is, we're still pretty early in the Legacy Fund's existence. It was just created by voters in 2010 and already has nearly $6 billion. As we've learned from other states that have similar funds, such as Alaska, when you're dealing with money of this size, it becomes more of a management challenge, not a spending challenge. As it stands today, all the earnings automatically come to the general fund every 2 years. That's how it was passed. And we're seeing the first transfer will come up here in a few months. It'll be about $400 million, and we know that over the next several years, that number is just going to keep getting larger and larger. We ran some numbers, we did some studies, and if in 40 years, if we spent all of the earnings, the fund could be about $34 billion. But if we reinvested all of the earnings, that fund could be over $140 billion. And over almost $65 billion of that just from compound interest, just to show the effect of putting some of that back into the principal so that that money can continue to grow. So we thought that it was the most appropriate management issue is that the legislature would have to take positive action to withdraw earnings instead of just getting the money automatically. We kind of equate it to having your investment portfolio. Your earnings on your investments don't come all the way into your checking account and give you the decision on how to spend it and then to consider whether or not you want to put any more back in. You need to take any out. And that's what we thought with the Legacy Fund. We thought it was a good proposal. The House agreed. We've had a lot of support, but the Senate wanted to do it more as a study.
So you think maybe after the 2-year study that might be one of the options still on the table?
We hope so. And we think that this has to be done constitutionally if we're really going to set the Legacy Fund up for multi-generational success and proper management.
So should the 2/3 vote required to dip into the principal of the Legacy Fund, should that be changed, or should you at least study a change in that?
Well, so the principal, we feel pretty comfortable with the principal being kept at the 2/3. That was never really a point of discussion, and there hasn't been much appetite to go into the principal. In fact, when the Legacy Fund was created, the reason the 2/3 for even just a little bit of the principal was put in there was it was really kind of an escape hatch in case we really were in dire fiscal straits and we needed some of that. They didn't want to lock up all of the principal, but they certainly didn't want to make it all available either and be potentially rated in just 1 or 2 sessions. So we think that would likely stay off the table or out of the primary point of discussion. For the most part, we're looking at the earnings.
Okay, so, but if the earnings were plowed back in to the principal, and that was one of the potential compromises was to say, okay, we'll do that, but we'll make it just a simple majority to dip into the fund.
Correct. Yeah. So one of the hangups was that a 2/3 majority to transfer or spend any of the earnings may have been too high of a bar. And the House and many of the supporters said this really wasn't as much about the vote as it was making the legislature take action. We felt that it was appropriate that every 2 years we consider legacy projects and how to use those funds so that every legislature gets to weigh the needs with the resources, make that decision. We felt it was a fiscally prudent way of operating. A simple majority was offered as a compromise. Unfortunately, there was very little appetite at that point to even pass the measure as in its concept.
So I guess the point is stay tuned when the study happens.
I guess that would be correct. And I should mention that we have been working with the Senate and the House, both chambers and leadership. And I have the resolution, the study that they wanted. We have that drafted in the exact same form and prepared to offer to the OMB budget. So, this wasn't a knockdown fight as much. It was just all agreeing on the same thing, but coming with different approaches. We will have the study come forward, and we will all work together on it.
Interesting, and we mentioned watch the OMB bill because there'll be a few ornaments on it, so to speak.
Yeah, the OMB bill tends to earn the nickname the Christmas tree bill because there's a little bit of something for everybody in it, and this is not going to be any different. There will be a plethora of amendments offered. In some cases, tweaks and fixes to things that we just didn't catch, and other times it's going to be some last-minute policy or a lot of times it's last-minute policy changes that just need to get worked in.
You know, the ethics bill is going through right now, and I think that's still going to be part of a study for 2 years, correct?
Correct. This week we just passed the ethics bill, and there's a study that was passed out as well. Senator Mathern's bill on the Senate side, that was converted into a study. So this interim, there is a mandatory study for us to review Article 14, which was Measure 1 that voters passed, and all of the laws related to it, making sure that everything is fully implemented. They'll have recommendations for the next session.
You were on the conference committee, and you objected to language that was proposed by the majority, which passed 4-2, and it had to do with the whistleblower hotline. Right. The bill carrier, Representative Casper, said that the problem with measure, that is now Article 14, is that it doesn't have a clause in it for due process. And he wanted, saying that if you're going to make a complaint, you have to give your name and address. You objected to that, and some people objected to that on the House floor too, because that said that might be a chilling effect for people to bring complaints.
It has that potential, and it's not that we were opposed to having due process. In fact, we fully support having due process. What we wanted to ensure is that if there was a complaint that was brought forward, or if someone was concerned, they wanted to call that confidential whistleblower hotline, that the fact that they would have to provide that information would deter them from pointing anything out. We spoke with law enforcement, and we learned that law enforcement agencies, if they receive a tip, an anonymous tip, even if that person doesn't provide their information, they still investigate. And if they find that there was any criminal wrongdoings, if there was a potential violation of law, they will try to find that person to file the report. And if they can, unfortunately, they just need to dismiss the charges. We felt that type of process is something that the Ethics Commission would likely adopt. So it was a reluctant opposition to it. We just want to make sure that we're ensuring anyone who needs to call that hotline and report, whether it's a misunderstanding or an actual act of misconduct, is able to do so without fear of retaliation.
I know that some of the arguments for it, spoken or unspoken, about this due process thing, is they're worried about harassment complaints.
Yeah, and that's, we get that a lot with the Ethics Commission. Is this going to become a political tool? And are people going to use this to bring frivolous or inappropriate complaints to the Ethics Commission? We're not the only state that's going to have an Ethics Commission. In fact, we are one of the last remaining to even have one. And I don't know for a fact, but I know that if this were a challenge, if ethics commissions were abused, and personal vendettas, or if it became a tool of harassing elected officials, you would see major reform in other states, and we haven't seen that. None of that has leaped towards North Dakota as we've gone down this path.
I have to ask you about something that also happened on the floor, and it concerned you carrying the budget for the State Auditor's Office.
Right.
There was a lot of objection to a little phrase that was added to it about the auditor getting permission from Legislative Audit and Fiscal Review if he was going to do some of these performance audits.
Correct.
Your argument as I heard it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that those things do cost money, and the legislature is the one that holds the purse strings. And the opponents of that said, we're tying the hands of the auditor.
Yeah, and it gets to be kind of a complicated issue, but there used to be a performance audit division, and that no longer exists. The auditor removed that, and they merged the positions together. So when the auditor has been working with us on his budget, he came in with his request, and we wanted to find out a lot of things: how are their staff, what types of audits are their staff doing, how much time they're spending on them, and then costs. The performance audit question came up. Right now, a performance audit can be initiated by the legislature and by the auditor. And as you mentioned, the Legislative Audit and Fiscal Review Committee is the one that oversees them. We often call it LAFRC, in case I say that again. Right now, the auditor's office is embarking on a very ambitious and significant performance audit on fees at all agencies. It's a massive undertaking, and his staff is having to work on it. They estimate that performance audit alone could take upwards of 6 months or more. Our concern is that not that performance audits are happening, and not necessarily that they're happening without legislative communication, but we see more opportunities for input. That a performance audit, a fiscal audit, is intended to be a mile wide and an inch deep, but a performance audit is an inch wide and a mile deep. And right now, some of these more ambitious performance audits, which take a significant amount of time and resources for that matter, they can tie up the agency for months on end. They can leave little room for more or other performance audits, no matter who initiated them. So we felt that this was just an appropriate step, that the auditor is able to do what he needs to do. He has the money in a budget, or whether we appropriate it or we give him authority to bill an agency, and that we're working together. There's good communication so that we're effectively auditing any agency or any portion of government that needs to be done, and we want the auditor to be involved in that conversation.
Is there any chance for unintended consequences with that?
That one's really hard to predict. Right now there have not been very many performance audits done over the last several years. This auditor has done more of them. The previous auditor, there was some years where there were more, and others where there were less. We feel that the auditor's office and LAFRC, that committee, the audit committee, have usually worked very well together. We get the information, they're reporting to us. It's our standing committee, so it meets quarterly. This will be a nice little pilot project for it. We'll try it out for 2 years. The auditor himself said he wasn't sure how many audits he'd even be able to initiate this year. So we'll work with him in the interim, and hopefully we have good findings when we come back to Bismarck in 2021.
And it might mean more coverage of LAFRC too.
That's exactly
by
right.
Reporters.
Absolutely, we'd love to see more of our friendly reporters in the room whenever we do get together.
You voted for the library, and that went through a number of twists and turns, and we talked about the legacy fund earlier. Yeah. There was a legacy fund proposal. When all is said and done, right or wrong?
Well, that's a judgment call. It was a very unique opportunity for North Dakota. You can hear the debate on whether or not the state should have invested the money. It is an endowment, so it's all the money that is going towards the library, the museum and library, will be owned and maintained. Those $50 million will stay with the state of North Dakota, and the earnings off of that endowment will go to help support the operations. So that was our commitment to the $150 million project. And I do need to say, it's not every day that some of our colleagues are less talkative than others. So when our dear friend and a longtime legislative leader, Bob Martinson, a Republican from Bismarck, when he got up and spoke, I think he speaks about once a generation on the floor. I think he used that opportunity wisely. It was he summed up a lot of the feelings quite well. That this is a great chance for North Dakota to pay homage and tribute to one of our presidents, and someone whose legacy was built largely around North Dakota.
And I've heard from a number of legislators, both parties, who said that Martinson's speech probably swayed some votes.
Yeah,
too.
I have a feeling that his speech probably added about 10 more yeses to that final vote, and that alone was worth the price of admission. The proposal was a very unique test and an idea on how we could use the legacy fund. Now, in this case, we're not using the earnings, but that was one of the original proposals. So this is going to set us down that path on how those earnings are used and what North Dakota does for strategic investments to help improve our state.
One of the other governor's initiatives was unification or consolidation, if you want to call it, of information technology. I know you were involved in the discussions during the interim.
Right.
Where are we at on that?
Yeah, so I chaired the IT committee, and that was a big part of our conversation. The governor came in. His proposal was to take all the IT personnel from all of the cabinet level agencies and roll them into the IT department, so that they're working all from the same page. And if it's one brand of computer that they're using, it's one brand. You don't have 6 different types of computers and 6 different parts of equipment that you need for replacements. That process is likely going to end in a pilot project where there will be 5 agencies. About 2/3 of the total IT staff across the cabinet will be rolled into IT department. The other agencies, the other third of those staff members will stay in their current homes under the current HR, and we will report back in 2 years to see if there was efficiencies, if they performed more efficiently, if we had better returns on their time and utilization. So I'm convinced that there's benefits to unification, and we want to make sure that if we are just going to do the pilot project, that the intent is to get the findings, get the report, and then to implement those findings next session. We don't want to start our way down the path and then stop halfway through and never really give it the full commitment.
So are the agencies the ones that are directly under the governor's control, or are there some elected?
Yeah, no, they're all, the proposal and the ones in the pilot project are all cabinet level positions that are under the governor's control. There are no other executive level elected official departments involved in the unification at all.
All right.
So.
And that's one to watch too, because you'll know some more after 2 years.
Right. Yes, and that's another one where the Information Technology Committee, the Legislative IT Committee, will likely have more interesting meetings just because we're talking about a major policy shift, and we would be one of the first states in the country to fully unify our IT services at the executive level. It's something that other states have talked about. North Dakota we're small, we're nimble, we're able to make these calculated risks, and we feel pretty confident that in 2 years we'll see some returns. We may go down the path completely, and hopefully that's a positive move that other states can emulate.
And of course, right now, with all the concern about cybersecurity, that also weighs them on.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that was a big part of this conversation is cybersecurity, and not just we're talking K-12 schools, higher education, and all state local government. And part of this package was a brand new cybersecurity, an automatic artificial intelligence for cybersecurity and the FTEs or the personnel to implement those changes. So we are working on that. We're going to give them a new department to work and address cybersecurity issues. So hopefully this comes out to be a positive move in the right direction for IT and technology across North Dakota.
Another one of the governor's initiatives, and I just wanted to get your idea about where we stand on it, because I haven't looked at the corrections budget for a little while.
Oh,
and
yeah.
The corrections budget, at one point, they had this, what we call kind of a domino effect about moving people out of the Southwest Correctional Center in New England, and that failed, or that might be changed, and there's potentially of doing some of that. Where are we at?
Last I heard is that there will be no reshuffling of the deck, that the Women's Correctional Facility will stay in New England. The men will stay in the Bismarck area, and then the facility, the state hospital in Jamestown, will not take any of the corrections personnel there. So right now, I think that's where it stands. The budget is still being tweaked and developed. But there will likely be some more studying about how we consolidate or how do we manage those facilities. It's not just about the efficiencies with the budgets and the government, but it's also treatment and care of the inmates. No matter why a person finds themselves in the state's care at a corrections facility, we do need to make sure that they're being taken care of. With the facility in New England, a lot of those, over the years, have been many pregnant mothers or pregnant women, and that was a big concern, is safety and maintaining familial connections. So those are all things that will come into consideration.
Okay, talk about another study.
Sure.
This might be another study. Plus, of course, the governor did propose a new state hospital on the grounds.
Right.
I know that raised a lot of questions, not necessarily opposition the way I read it, but a lot of questions, and lawmakers were not willing to pull that plug at that point.
Yeah, and that's, again, going back to the domino effect, that was part of that piece, is the state hospital would have been repurposed and a new facility would have been constructed. And that, big big conversation piece. It's having a single facility in Jamestown versus doing more services across Greater North Dakota. I know it's been studied and reviewed over many biennia. That was a little too ambitious for this legislative session, and there wasn't enough support to move that idea forward this year.
I have to ask about this one because when I saw it come back in the parks budget, it made me smile. And I think you might be what I'm talking about. The day park that is down near the Missouri River Correctional Center. Yeah. I know that was put back in by the House, but maybe that's now a study again. And we're talking a lot about studies, but that shows you how complicated the issues are. Yeah,
when you look at how many studies the legislature goes through, it's amazing we don't become Rhodes Scholars at the end of this. We have an ambitious agenda ahead of us this interim. From everything from traffic fines and studies, safety, to buildings and infrastructure, the legacy fund. Yeah, this is going to be a very ambitious interim, and hopefully we have a lot of these ideas flushed out when we get back here in 2 years.
Any particular study you'd like to be on the committee?
Well, definitely want to keep working on the legacy fund. I mean, that's an important issue. It's one that I've been working on quite a bit. Information technology has been near and dear to my heart. I've served on it since I came to the legislature in 2009 and have been a chairman now the last 2 years. Those are two of the bigger ones. But we'll also keep monitoring a lot of the other studies that we've worked on, including traffic safety, working with the Highway Patrol, law enforcement, and the Department of Transportation. We've got decades worth of traffic laws in there that need to be revisited and updated. I mean, there's a wide variety, but anything involving economic development, transportation and safety, legacy fund, and technology, those are going to be the issues that I'll be watching most closely.
And I know we don't have a lot of time, but workforce development is also going to be part of that, too.
Absolutely, yeah. Workforce development, economic development, all of those pieces about our state's economic future. Those are part of the study, and that's something that I've watched very closely several years now.
Okay, Representative Cory Mock, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Dave.
Our guest, Representative Cory Mock, Democrat from Grand Forks. The legislative session began with more than 900 bills. Political correspondent Chad Merrill looks back at some of the big changes that were made this year.
The session began with a big focus on behavioral health. Here's Senate Minority Leader Senator Joan Heckman.
The takeover of the county social services and the 19 zones that they're going to have out there. I think that will be important in making sure that we have someone who is capable of providing services in remote areas of our state.
And infrastructure needs.
When we came in here, Operation Prairie Dog was out there.
House Majority Leader Representative Chet Pollard.
We brought some much needed dollars to the local political subdivisions, as far as dollars for roads, infrastructure.
Also at the top of the list, state employee raises.
I think that's important. We've kept the health insurance packages for them, which I think is very important to them and their families.
They're set at 2% and 2.5%, a compromise between the House and Senate proposals. Another compromise came on one of the governor's main initiatives. He asked to create multiple boards of higher education. Instead, lawmakers voted to expand the existing board, an idea that will go to voters in 2020. Session went a little longer than leadership had hoped, but for good reason.
I think the House had 115 or 120 extra bills this session. We had a lot more lifting, and we've had a lot more contentious issues, it seems like the TR library. I mean, that was an issue from day one.
An issue, among others, that wasn't resolved until the final week of session.
And Chad joins me on set here. And okay, I have to ask you, what were your favorite bills that you've covered?
There are a lot of really good ones and some that we're still going to have to keep an eye on even after the session. Something that's just popped up this week even, we've been covering how the legislature voted to make it a little bit more difficult for voters to change the Constitution through initiated measure. The legislature would then have a vote after voters voted on something. Well, now we're going to see a petition circulate to get a measure on the ballot that would make that harder for the legislature to do that. They don't want voters don't want the legislature to have that kind of power, or at least the people behind this petition anyway. So that's potentially something that could come up again during election time.
So I noticed you mentioned that. I saw the petition, and I thought if that's going to be on the ballot at the same time, that could be a really interesting election to watch.
Yeah, at the same time, you could be voting on the legislature's bill to give them the power to then vote on those constitutional measures, and you could be voting on this initiated measure. If the petition gets approved and if it gets on the ballot, you could be voting on both those at the same time. Could be really interesting.
You know, Representative Mock talked about this. This interim is going to be filled with some very, very important studies. You're watching the Legacy Fund one?
That's definitely one to watch. Another thing that I think, you know, the governor got some support for the presidential library. However, now we're going to have to see a fundraising effort here behind it. There's going to have to be some private donations to get that money from the state and to make this library still a reality. So I think we're going to start to see a big push for that once the session's over. I
am glad you brought that up, because the way the bill is written, the governor has to prove that he's got $100 million ready to go. He's got donors who are going to have the $100 million. We're hearing some names, of course, of donors who are ready to go.
Some donors out there, but it's a lot of money to raise. So we'll see who's throwing their money into it right off the bat.
And that'll trigger the other things, the $15 million plus the $35 million loan too.
Anything that you're taking away from the session?
I think one of the more interesting studies is going to be this whole thing about fees, looking at fees and whether or not they're still viable. Should fees become taxes? Should fees be eliminated? I think that's going to be a massive study, and it might take more than just 2 years.
Yeah, a lot of important work still ahead. So, and the session wrapped up, but work's never over.
That's right. The band may have stopped, but the melody lingers on. Well, thank you for joining us for Legislative Review. I'm Dave Thompson.